What happens when a martial arts legend and Hollywood icon sits down for what should be a light-hearted late-night interview, only to realize he's been set up? Tonight we break down the fiery confrontation that turned the Jimmy Kimmel Live set into a battleground, one that ended with security rushing in and Chuck Norris walking out. This is a story about dignity, provocation, and what happens when a talk show host crosses a line that never should have been crossed, so hit that subscribe button, leave your thoughts in the comments, and buckle up. Because this moment didn't just break the internet, it redefined it. Chuck Norris stepped onto the stage with quiet confidence, his trademark calm honed by decades of discipline, both on screen and in the dojo. The audience erupted with applause, some even rising to their feet. He gave a humble nod, his movements precise, almost military. "Chuck Norris, everybody!" Jimmy Kimmel called out, grinning wide. "Thanks for having me, Jimmy." Chuck replied, voice steady, respectful. They exchanged a few pleasantries before Jimmy leaned in, his tone playful but laced with something harder. "So, Chuck," he began, "these internet Chuck Norris facts, you've seen them, right? Stuff like Chuck Norris counted to infinity twice, or Chuck Norris can divide by 0. What do you make of becoming a meme?" Chuck chuckled lightly. "I think it's fun. People have gotten creative with it. My grandkids love it." Jimmy nodded, but his smile began to shift, something sharper underneath. "Sure, it's funny," he said. "But don't you think it's also kind of misleading? I mean, you're this mythical figure now, but when was the last time you actually did anything legendary?" The audience tensed. Chuck didn't flinch, but his posture shifted ever so slightly. Calm, but alert. "I'm not sure. I follow," he said coolly. "Well," Jimmy pressed, voice feigning innocence, "you're pushing 80. These days you mostly do infomercials. Haven't done a real movie in years. Isn't it fair to say the Chuck Norris mystique is more fantasy than fact?" The room fell nearly silent. Chuck studied him for a long beat before replying. "Jimmy, I've lived a life I'm proud of. I've made movies, trained thousands in martial arts, served my country. I've never needed to hype myself up, I just did the work." But Jimmy wasn't done. "Come on, Chuck," he said, his tone now openly dismissive. "Bruce Lee was a martial arts philosopher. Jackie Chan still does his own stunts in his 60s. What did you really do? Win a few karate tournaments? Star in a couple of cheesy action flicks?" Chuck's eyes narrowed. The studio lights reflected off the glint in his stare. Not anger, but precision, discipline. "What exactly are you trying to say, Jimmy?" he asked, voice quiet but sharp enough to cut glass. Jimmy shrugged. "I'm just saying, maybe it's time we separate the legend from the man. Maybe you're just a relic from a different time. A symbol, not a force. What happened next wasn't physical, but it was powerful." Chuck slowly stood. The silence in the studio was absolute. "I didn't come here to be mocked," he said, evenly. "I came here in good faith, but I won't sit quietly while you try to turn respect into ridicule." Security moved subtly. The floor manager gestured nervously from the wings. Chuck gave a respectful nod to the audience and walked off stage. Calm, composed, unshaken. The interview was never aired in full, but what leaked became the most controversial clip in late night. History. Narrator. Closing. In a world obsessed with tearing down legends, Chuck Norris reminded everyone that some men don't need to raise their voice or their fist to command a room. They just need to stand up, and walk away. Let us know what you think. Was Jimmy out of line? Did Chuck handle it the right way? Drop your take in the comments. This is Late Night Unmasked. And this was one for the books. Chuck was silent for several moments. The air in the studio shifted. You could feel it. Something intangible but undeniable. The crowd, once lively, now sat in stunned silence, sensing a line had just been crossed. When Chuck finally spoke, his voice was calm, but carried the gravity of a man who had been pushed too far. "Jimmy," he said slowly, "I came here tonight to talk about my career, my family. Maybe share a few stories, laugh a little. What I didn't come here for was to be disrespected." Jimmy let out a short, awkward laugh, the kind that doesn't quite reach the eyes. "Chuck, come on. I'm just asking questions. Isn't that what interviews are for? Or do you only go on shows where people kiss your ring and act like you're some kind of god?" Chuck didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He just sat perfectly still, so still it was unsettling. "There's a difference between asking questions and trying to tear someone down," he said. "You're not interested in answers. You're chasing a cheap laugh." The playful smile on Jimmy's face was now more of a mask, tense, stretched. "Oh, come on. You can't take a little tough questioning?" he challenged, smirking. "What happened to the guy who was tougher than nails? You gonna cry? Want me to get you a tissue?" There was an audible gasp from the audience. Even the band stopped fidgeting. Chuck turned toward Jimmy slowly, deliberately, and for the first time all night, the host seemed to grasp that he may have gone too far. "You know what, Jimmy?" Chuck said, voice even but laced with iron. "I've been in this business over 40 years. I've worked with true professionals, and I've worked with amateurs. I've faced journalists who asked hard questions because they respected their craft, and I've sat across from clowns who just wanted to look clever at their guests' expense." Jimmy's grin twitched. "And which am I?" he asked, his usual swagger dimming. "You tell me," Chuck replied coldly. "Is this how you treat all your guests, or did you decide to make an exception for me tonight?" The tension was suffocating. You could hear the squeak of someone shifting in their seat. Jimmy fidgeted, unsure now, but still unwilling to back down. "Look, Chuck," he said, trying to recover. "This is comedy. This is late night. We poke fun. We ask the tough stuff. We keep it interesting. Maybe you're just not used to being challenged." Chuck leaned in slightly. "Jimmy, I've been challenged by men who could break bones with their bare hands. I've been challenged by directors hanging me from helicopters and setting me on fire. I've been challenged by real life, the kind that tests your soul. What you're doing, this isn't a challenge. It's petty," Jimmy scoffed. "Petty? Chuck, you're a public figure. You've made millions selling this myth of invincibility. Doesn't the public deserve to know what's behind the curtain? I mean, come on. When was the last time you were in a real fight? And I don't mean choreographed Hollywood punches or staged exhibitions. I mean a real fight." The bait was obvious. Chuck saw it for what it was. His reply was measured, dangerous. "Are you asking me to prove something, Jimmy? Because if you are, we can settle this right here, right now." The audience let out a collective gasp. Jimmy blinked. His smirk faltered. "Whoa, whoa," he said, hands raised, a nervous chuckle escaping. "I'm not trying to fight you. I'm just saying, maybe the whole Chuck Norris thing is marketing, smoke and mirrors. There's no shame in that. Most of Hollywood is." Chuck tilted his head slightly. "So now I'm smoke and mirrors? I think," Jimmy said, regaining some footing. "You're a smart businessman who took A modest martial arts career and turned it into a brand. And hey, respect for that. But let's not pretend you're some kind of superhero, just because of a few internet jokes. Chuck didn't speak at first. He simply studied Jimmy with the same laser focus that had won him championships. When he finally broke the silence, his voice was low, steady, and final. "Jimmy, do you even know what respect is?" Jimmy rolled his eyes. "Of course I do." "No," Chuck said. "You don't. Because if you did, you'd know it's not something you get just because you have a desk and a camera. It's something you give, especially to a guest in your house." Jimmy leaned forward, jaw tight. "This is my show, Chuck. This is my house. And I'll ask whatever questions I want." Chuck nodded once. "Then maybe you should start asking better ones." Jimmy leaned in, his voice laced with mock sincerity. "If you don't like it, Chuck, you're welcome to leave. Is that what you want? You want to walk out?" Chuck didn't flinch. "Is that what you want? For me to walk out? I want you to stop hiding behind this mythical warrior act." Jimmy snapped. "I want you to be real. Admit that Chuck Norris the legend is just a character, and Chuck Norris the man is just another aging actor trying to stay relevant." A heavy silence fell over the studio. Chuck stared at Jimmy, unblinking, before slowly rising from his seat. The motion was smooth, deliberate, more commanding than any outburst. The entire room held its breath. "You're right about one thing," Chuck said, voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. "The legend and the man. They're not the same. The legend, he never gets angry, never loses control, always calm, always collected." Jimmy shifted in his seat, suddenly aware of how much larger Chuck appeared when standing. "But the man," Chuck continued, "the man has spent a lifetime learning discipline, respect, honor, and the man doesn't take kindly to being disrespected by someone who thinks a desk and a laugh track make him powerful." "Chuck, sit down," Jimmy said, trying to sound authoritative. It came out shaky. "You're making this awkward." Chuck laughed once, sharp, humorless. "I'm making this awkward. Jimmy, you invited me here as your guest, then spent the entire time trying to tear me down. That's not interviewing. That's humiliation dressed up as entertainment." "Come on," Jimmy said, though his bravado was slipping. "If you can't handle a little ribbing, maybe you shouldn't do interviews." Chuck's tone darkened. "There's a difference between ribbing and ridicule. What you've been doing tonight, that's not wit, it's cruelty. And the worst part? You think you're entitled to it because this is your show." Jimmy opened his mouth to argue, but Chuck stepped forward. "In martial arts, we have something called honor. It means treating even your opponents with dignity. It means you don't win by dragging someone else down. You win by rising above." Chuck gestured around the studio. "But this whole setup, it's built on mockery, and you've mistaken cruelty for comedy." "This is entertainment," Jimmy said weakly. "People tune in for this. They expect the tough questions." "No, Jimmy," Chuck said, shaking his head. "What they expect is authenticity. What they got tonight was bullying. And the fact you can't tell the difference tells me everything I need to know about your character." The crew froze. The audience sat silent, caught in the crossfire of a moment that had moved far beyond late-night antics. Jimmy forced a chuckle and looked to the audience. "Okay, Chuck. I think you're overreacting. This is just how late night works. We joke, we push a little. Maybe you've been out of the spotlight too long and forgotten the game." Chuck took another step forward. Jimmy instinctively leaned back. "Let me make something clear. Chuck said quietly. I haven't forgotten show business. I remember when it had class, when hosts treated their guests with dignity. What I've seen here tonight, that's not show business. That's a small man playing king because he has a desk and a camera. Jimmy's face flushed. Now hold on. You don't get to come on my show and tell me how to do my job. I've been doing this for years. Presidents, rock stars, movie icons. They all get it. It's part of the territory. Chuck raised an eyebrow. And what territory is that, Jimmy? The one where you get to be a bully because you have the microphone. The one where you dress up disrespect as journalism. I asked real questions, Jimmy insisted, but even he sounded unsure. No, Chuck said. A real question sounds like, Chuck, how did you go from martial arts to movies? Or, what advice would you give young fighters today? Not, aren't you just a washed-up fraud in a meme costume? That's not a question, Jimmy. That's an insult. Jimmy sat in stunned silence, and for the first time that night, so did everyone else. Chuck, how do you feel about the internet memes that have been made about you? Chuck paused, letting the silence build. Then he spoke, calm but cutting. Now that would have been a real question, Jimmy. But that's not what you asked. Instead, you questioned my accomplishments, mocked my age, implied I'm a fraud, and tried to provoke me like I'm some trained dog here to entertain you. That's not journalism. That's harassment. Off stage, Jimmy's producer was flailing in panic, but Jimmy, blinded by ego, pressed on. If you can't take the heat, Chuck, maybe you shouldn't be in the kitchen, Jimmy said, defaulting to cliché. This is TV, entertainment. If you wanted soft questions, you should have gone on Ellen. That did it. Chuck's expression turned to stone. His voice dropped, low, even, but brimming with authority. You're right, Jimmy. If I wanted to be treated with respect, I should have gone somewhere else. Clearly that's a foreign concept to you. With slow, deliberate movements, Chuck began detaching his mic. Whoa, Chuck, what are you doing? Jimmy asked, suddenly realizing what was happening. What I should have done 10 minutes ago, Chuck replied. I'm removing myself from this toxic mess. You can't just walk out mid-interview, Jimmy stammered, panic rising. Watch me, Chuck said, stepping away from his chair. Chuck, come on. Don't be so sensitive, Jimmy pleaded. This is just conversation. This is good television. Chuck turned to him one last time, disappointment clouding his face. Jimmy, this isn't good television. This is a train wreck. And the saddest part is, you don't even realize it. You think humiliating your guests makes you clever, but all it does is make you look small. Jimmy flinched. Small? He echoed, his voice cracking. Yes, small, insecure, desperate for attention. Chuck stepped toward the stage's edge. I've met heroes and cowards, champions and cheats, but I've never met someone so desperate to look tough that they'd tear down a guest on their own show. Jimmy stood, his face a mix of fury and shame. You think you're better than me? He shouted. Just 'cause you know karate, you think you can come on my show and disrespect me? Chuck's voice softened, but carried a weight Jimmy couldn't match. I don't think I'm better than you, Jimmy. I just think I'm better than this. Security appeared at the edge of the stage, summoned by the chaos, but Chuck held up a hand, halting them. No need for security, he said calmly. I'm leaving on my own. Unlike some people, I know when to walk away. Fine. Leave, Jimmy snapped, his voice trembling. Run away like the coward you are. Chuck stopped at the very edge of the stage. He turned back one last time, eyes locked on Jimmy's. I've been called a lot of things over the years. Tough, disciplined, stubborn, even difficult to work with. But in 4 decades, no one's ever called me a coward. Until tonight. He paused. Congratulations, Jimmy. You get to be the first. With that, Chuck Norris walked off the Jimmy Kimmel Live stage. Behind him, Jimmy stood frozen, ghost pale, gripping the edge of his desk like it might anchor him from falling apart. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of his unraveling. Well, Jimmy finally managed to say, barely audible. That's Chuck Norris, everybody. But the damage was done. The interview meant to showcase Jimmy's wit, and charm had backfired. He hadn't exposed Chuck Norris. He'd exposed himself as a bully who picked the wrong guest to humiliate. Chuck wasn't kicked off the show. He walked out with his dignity intact. And Jimmy? He was left to face the silence and the judgment of a stunned audience. What do you think? Did Chuck handle the situation the right way? Or should he have stayed and fought back on air? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that hit harder than a roundhouse kick.